You have your license, you passed the training, and you're armed and ready. You're officially a bounty hunter. But before you go out chasing those bail jumpers, there are a few more things to keep in mind. Here are some more of the insane rules bounty hunters have to follow. Bounty hunters have a lot of freedom when it comes to making arrests. They can even skip a lot of that red tape the police have to deal with. But their authority is a bit more limited. They've been deputized to bring in the skip, and only the skip. Say they corner the bail jumper in his home, but it turns out his elderly mother lives with him. She starts throwing things at the bounty hunter and chasing him with a rolling pin, yelling that her little boy did nothing wrong. A police officer would arrest her as an accessory, but the bounty hunter doesn't have any authority to detain her. And they better be careful who they arrest. It's happened to a lot of people. The police arrest someone and lock them up in a cold cell, only pulling them out to interrogate them. Then it turns out that that person they arrested was on the Jumbotron at the baseball game at the exact moment the crime was committed. They arrested the wrong person and let him go, but good luck getting any compensation for that false arrest. Police officers usually have immunity from being sued for false arrest unless there was excessive misconduct, but bounty hunters don't have that protection. They can be sued in civil court as civilian agents if they think the wrong person fits the description of their skip. And if they do catch the right person, they better mind their manners. Catching skips isn't an easy job. The defendants will often do anything to avoid going back to trial, and that includes getting violent with the bounty hunters. Bounty hunters can use force in a similar way to police officers, restraining the escapee and using non-lethal force to subdue them. But like police, their use of force is strictly regulated. They can't use any level of excessive force, so no injuring a skip once they've been subdued. And you better believe that any injuries on the bail jumper will be scrutinized once they're brought to jail. If a bounty hunter is found to have used excessive force, they could face either civil or criminal charges. And if they do cross the line, there are people ready to make them answer for it. There are a lot of risks in a bounty hunter's job. Even the best agent can run into trouble when scrapping with a particularly violent skip or when chasing one in a crowd. Car chases can result in property damage, and there's always the chance that pinning one to the ground will result in a broken arm. Egregious cases of abuse will be dealt with by the state police department and could result in criminal charges or loss of license. But other civil cases are typically dealt with through the state's Department of Insurance, and many are settled out of court. A lot of bounty hunters use a system to minimize this risk. If a bounty hunter is out on their own hunting a skip, they're more likely to make a mistake. That's where another position comes into play. Did you ever want to be a bounty hunter without leaving your couch? After all, scrapping with skips might make it hard to play in that Super Smash Bros. Tournament, and that's why some people choose to become skip tracers. These digital bounty hunters often work for bail bond agencies to track bounty hunters down through other means, like searching their social media activity for any place they've checked in. After all, with massive social media networks tracking our every move, some people give away their location without even knowing it, as people who called in sick and then checked in at the movie theater found out from their angry boss. So is it just open season on anyone awaiting trial for bounty hunters to come after them? Not exactly. But most people who were out on bond agree to it without ever realizing it. When they signed the bond agreement with the court and the bail bond agency, it's usually in the contract that the bounty hunters can come and retrieve them if they violate their terms. In cases where the client personally puts up the full cash bail, it often falls back to the police to track them down and apprehend them for skipping bail, which actually might make it easier to get away since the police have more restrictions barring them from entering a residence. And different states have different laws, potentially putting a bounty hunter in serious legal risk. Bounty hunters should know their geography before kicking off their next hunt. If they're licensed in one state, they can usually pursue the skip all across the state, no matter how many county lines they have to cross. But state lines are a different matter. All 50 states have extradition agreements with each other, but not all permit bounty hunters to operate. Kentucky, for instance, abolished its bail bond system and requires bail to be paid directly through the court system. So no bounty hunting is allowed in the state unless the suspect is facing federal charges and fled to Kentucky. But what about when things get especially intense? It's one of the most famous images in Western films, a poster reading "Wanted, Dead or Alive." The fugitive who sees that knowing there's a price on their head, and the bounty hunter that finds them might just decide it's easier to bring back their head than tie them up and strap them to a horse. Those days of the Wild West are long gone, but bounty hunters do still have the authority to use lethal force. That's why they're allowed to carry guns in most states. The rules for it are very different than they used to be, though. Now, bounty hunters are only allowed to use lethal force if there's a legitimate danger to their life or to the lives of civilians due to the actions of the bail jumper. And just like any police officer who discharges their weapon, you better believe any fatal shooting by a bounty hunter will be closely scrutinized by the authorities. This even applied back in the West, in one of the most infamous killings of all times. Jesse James was a wanted man, and Governor Thomas Crittenden was willing to pay. The state of Missouri, backed by several rail companies, offered a $5,000 reward for the notorious thief, upwards of $130,000 today. Two of James's fellow outlaws, Charlie and Robert Ford, ambushed him while having breakfast and shot shot him in the back of the head. When they showed up to collect their reward, the two criminals turned bounty hunters found themselves locked up instead, because even in those wild days of cowboys and bandits, you weren't allowed to shoot an unarmed man while his back was turned to collect a bounty on him. But most people might know about bounty hunters from another more futuristic source. The most famous bounty hunter in the world is probably Boba Fett, the armored clone warrior who earned the hatred of Star Wars fans when he captured Han Solo, and their adoration when he protected Baby Yoda. He's not the only bounty hunter in the Star Wars universe, with assorted aliens and droids competing to collect bounties, but anyone who patterns themselves after these rogues will probably find themselves locked up pretty quickly, because most bounty hunters in the movies are essentially private mercenaries, not agents of the law. Case in point, Boba Fett turned over Han Solo not to the authorities, but to the giant slug who hired him. That's not bounty hunting, that's just kidnapping. And bounty hunters aren't actually allowed to work for anyone but the court system and their bail bond agency. But if you really wanted to, could you wear a Boba Fett costume while arresting skips? That depends on your state. In most cases, you can wear whatever you want, and many a bounty hunter have taken advantage of the element of surprise. It's like a more full-contact version of process servers. You never know who might actually be a trained agent looking to drag you back to court, but this isn't the case everywhere, and if you're a fugitive hiding out in the Big Easy, you might have a little edge over your pursuer. The state of Louisiana is the only state where bounty hunting is legal, but agents are required to wear identifying clothing when arresting someone in their home. This is to make it harder for people to claim to be bounty hunters when they're actually just kidnappers or scammers. Meanwhile, Minnesota bans them from driving white, black, maroon, or dark green vehicles, or wearing colors that are associated with the police. Texas, meanwhile, takes an unusual approach. Some states ban anyone who works in law enforcement from being a bounty hunter. After all, you don't want a conflict of interest, but Texas is just fine with it. In fact, they require all bounty hunters to either be peace officers, armed security officers with level 3 clearance, or private investigators certified by the state. This limits the number of bounty hunters in the state, but has its advantages. Anyone who is authorized to hunt bounties in Texas has likely already passed training and background checks, so you don't have to worry about your drunk Uncle Billy who decided to become a bounty hunter after watching Dog the Bounty Hunter marathons. And in 4 states, it's probably best not to waste any time chasing skips. Oregon, Kentucky, Wisconsin, and Illinois are the only states to ban the practice of bounty hunting entirely. What else do these 4 states have in common? They've also banned commercial bail bonds. All 4 states ban any commercial organization from paying bail for a criminal defendant and instead require individuals or their relatives to pay the bond directly to the court system or jail where the person has been held. If a fugitive jumps bail and heads to these states, they're not free and clear. The warrant for their arrest is still valid and will be carried out by the legal system, but that might mean no payday for the bounty hunter who has the contract out for him. But what about outside our borders? Bounty hunting is big business in the US, but that's where it's supposed to end. One of the top warnings you'll hear when talking to a veteran bounty hunter is that what happens in America stays in America. For a bounty hunter to apprehend someone, the crime they've charged with has to be recognized as a crime in their jurisdiction, and the justice system there has to have some authority over it. To apprehend a fugitive from abroad is usually a complex legal maneuver involving extradition treaties, and even between allies, there may be situations where a court declines to extradite someone hiding out in a foreign country. Not that this has stopped some bounty hunters. Even within the confines of the US mainland, bounty hunters need to be careful. Sovereign Native American territories within the borders don't recognize outside bounty hunters. Any bounty hunters who illegally hunt outside their jurisdiction can find themselves in major legal trouble, like the infamous Dwayne "Dog" Chapman did when he apprehended fugitive Andrew Luster. The millionaire felon was wanted, but he was hiding out in Mexico, and our southern neighbor took violations of their sovereignty seriously. Dog was released, but later nearly extradited back to Mexico to face trial until the statute of limitations expired. Dog insists he was following Mexico's citizen arrest law, but most legal experts and fellow bounty hunters disagree. But bounty hunters who cross the line can face even bigger trouble. Sidney Jaffe was a Canadian businessman born in the US who got himself in trouble in Florida on land fraud charges. After facing trial and posting bond with the help of accredited surety and casualty, he fled to Canada where he had lived for several years and applied for citizenship. The bail bond company stood to lose $137,500 if he disappeared, so they deputized 2 men, Tim Johnson and Daniel Keir, to travel to Canada and get him back. They grabbed Jaffe while he was jogging and took him back to the US, but Jaffe claimed that he was kidnapped and they threatened to kill him. It would be the start of one of the ugliest affairs in US-Canada relations since the War of 1812. While Jaffe was convicted, the verdict was overturned in 1983. Florida soon issued new charges against him and he posted bail again and returned to Toronto. He was found guilty of contempt of court in absentia, but at the same time Canada opened an investigation investigation into the initial capture of Jaffe. The U.S. Secretary of State soon got involved, asking Florida to dismiss the charges in order to not hurt U.S.-Canada relations any further. While the legal wrangling over Jaffe's case was ongoing, Johnson and Keir were extradited to Canada and eventually convicted of kidnapping. It was one of the only cases of its kind, although their sentences were eventually reduced to time served. But sometimes governments skirt the law on this issue, a great risk to the hunters. In the aftermath of World War II, many Nazi leaders fled prosecution, the most infamous of which was Adolf Eichmann, one of Hitler's right-hand men. The Nazi loyalist was hiding out in Argentina, which refused to cooperate with the State of Israel in extraditing him. Unwilling to let a collaborator in the murder of millions walk away, Israel deputized an elite team of Mossad and Shin Bet agents to hunt him down and bring him back to Israel to face trial. While not technically bounty hunters, as they were agents of their government rather than a private company, they essentially functioned as such once they landed in Argentina. One wrong move could cause an international crisis. The government decided to capture him rather than execute him, and the team stalked Eichmann in Buenos Aires until they found the perfect opportunity to capture him. 3 Mossad men grabbed him, hid him in their car under a blanket, and kept him in a safe house for 9 days until they took him to the airport. If discovered, Argentina would likely protect Eichmann and arrest the agents, so they sedated him, dressed him as a flight attendant, and snuck him out of the country on a diplomatic flight. The abduction caused an international firestorm, but the Nazi war criminal was brought back to Israel, where he was put on trial and executed. But the risk to the agents drive home the dangers for any bounty hunter who decides to cross national borders. But even within borders, bounty hunters need to be careful what cases they take. It might be tempting to freelance, especially if the client is offering some big money. Maybe a prominent citizen wants you to bring a guy who cheated on his daughter. He just wants to talk, you see? Or maybe someone with an outstanding judgment in a civil case wants some help collecting. But these aren't considered bounty hunting cases, they're just considered kidnapping or shakedowns. Bounty hunters are only allowed to take cases under one circumstance, a bail skip where the court has issued a warrant for their arrest. Bounty hunters who also work as private investigators or detectives can also investigate other cases, but they have no jurisdiction to bring them in. But it wasn't always that way, and bounty hunters used to be employed for all sorts of unsavory causes. John of the Priests sounds like a man of God, but he was actually anything but. The man, born John Maloney in the late 1600s, started life as a notorious drunkard and horse thief. Caught and facing the gallows, he was given a unique opportunity by the Sheriff of Mayo. The Protestant monarch, Queen Anne, was seeking to eliminate the Roman Catholic religion, and all priests had been ordered to convert or face imprisonment or death. Maloney was given the task to stalk and ambush the priests, even showing up at churches for confession and stabbing the priest through the wall of the enclave. This made him one of the most hated men in Ireland, and even caught up to him when he was ambushed by a mob of Catholics and killed. It wasn't the only time a regime enlisted the public to hunt their enemies. In Nazi Germany, it didn't take much to get sentenced to death. Often, who you were born as was more than enough. As Hitler's regime closed in, many Jewish people fled Germany and tried to find safety in neighboring countries. But as Germany expanded its territory, Hitler was obsessed with rooting out every last Jewish person, and he had a lot of help. The Heineke Column, a group of Dutch Nazi sympathizers, made a full-time living identifying and turning in Jewish people in the Netherlands who were hiding. They were paid just under $5 per successful trip in today's US dollars, which is awfully cheap for a human life. But the collaborators were eventually held accountable, with most members being put on trial after the war and many initially being sentenced to death. And even in the US, some bounty hunters worked for human rights violators. For those born into slavery, there were only 2 paths to freedom: buy your freedom, which was almost impossible for someone forced to work for no pay their whole life, or take it by running to a free state. But the United States recognized escaped slaves as property until slavery was abolished, which meant that slave catchers could come to free states, kidnap escaped slaves, and transport them back to the South. This was one of the most controversial elements of the debate over slavery that led to the Civil War, especially since many of these slave catchers were notoriously corrupt. Most famously, Solomon Northup was kidnapped from New York and sold into slavery down south, and no one down there cared about his protest that he was born free. It took 12 years for his freedom to be restored. But most bounty hunters followed a common path. The profession of bounty hunting had been going on for hundreds of years, but it became more prominent when wanted posters and rewards for apprehending fugitives became more common. While running in a fugitive might have been a task for a mercenary in the old days, starting in the Old West, those who brought in escapees were more likely to be scrutinized as well, and that meant that they had to abide by the law. Gone were the days of grizzled mercenaries being sent out to kill someone that the cops couldn't find. Now there was red tape to contend with, and bounty hunters couldn't just kill someone without cause. But that didn't mean the escapees weren't going to try to kill them. While not every capture of a skip is life likely to be a life-threatening event, it's always a possibility. How violent a skip becomes might depend on how desperate they are. A criminal out on bail for theft who runs isn't as likely a risk to turning a potential 1-year sentence into a life sentence for killing a bounty hunter. But someone who's facing decades in prison might not feel that they have anything to lose. Skips are often serious about staying ahead of the law, and they can react violently when cornered. They've been known to attack bounty hunters, sometimes with deadly weapons. Fortunately, bounty hunters are allowed to protect themselves. What are bounty hunters allowed to carry to defend themselves? Pretty much anything they want within the law. Bounty hunters aren't cops and don't have to follow a standard code of conduct. Bounty hunters are often armed and carry smaller weapons like incapacitating sprays, blunt objects like clubs, and protective gear like bulletproof vests. Just make sure to check the local laws. What's legal to carry varies from state to state, and unless the state makes an exception for bounty hunters, using the wrong tool could bring a hefty fine or worse. Of course, sometimes the best weapon is your own body, which is why many bounty hunters are trained in unarmed combat. If a skip gets belligerent, a well-trained agent can easily pin them and handcuff them with a well-timed hold without ever drawing their weapon. And some bounty hunters have faced extreme challenges. Bounty targets have resorted to some extreme methods to get away, and they sometimes have help. Bounty hunters have found themselves fighting not just the target but their significant other, siblings, friends, and even their parents. They've had to jump on the car of a fleeing fugitive to get them to stop, and several have been seriously injured while trying that risky move. Of course, some skips use less violent means to get away, including trying to bribe the bounty hunter with money or even sex. Taking this deal might get the bounty hunter charged with aiding and abetting a fugitive, and even worse, would definitely get them fired and blacklisted from their agency. But there's often a ticking clock on all that money. In some cases, bounty hunting is an open-ended contract, but those are rare. In most cases, the bounty hunter's agency and the court will give them a year to get their hands on the fugitive and bring him back. That means the best advice a fugitive could get is to move on, get to another state or even another country, and not contact anyone from their old life. That's usually how most skips in the wind are finally caught. But a year is a long time to be isolated from family and friends, and most usually give themselves away eventually. And while it's easy to get lazy when the clock is ticking down, the bounty hunter is likely to be searching more aggressively than ever those last few days. And even if the bounty goes away, the warrant doesn't, so the skip might be dealing with the cops instead of a bounty hunter if they return. But one tactic can raise a bit of controversy. Say a fugitive has been on the run for a while. They've settled into a new life, are staying clean, and haven't thought about their old warrant for a while. They meet a new guy at the bar, hit it off, and become friends. They even let the guy into their house, not knowing that their new friend is secretly looking for proof that they're the person they're looking for. And as soon as they get it, their new friend slaps the cuffs on them. It's like dealing with an undercover officer, except there's no badge to be seen. While in Louisiana, bounty hunters have to identify themselves, in most states it's completely legal to lie to your target to get close to them. There's a lot of money on the line in bounty hunting, and these companies aren't playing by the rules of mismanners. But many bounty hunters have one surprising pet peeve. They don't like to be called bounty hunters. That gives the impression of shady mercenaries, which might be why people keep wondering if they can track down that cheating boyfriend. Additionally, the title is most associated with celebrity bounty hunter Dwayne Chapman, who is controversial in the community, to put it lightly. Most bounty hunters like to be called bail enforcement agents or fugitive recovery agents and view themselves as another arm of the justice system. They even have their own professional association. Bounty hunters are professionals with a strict set of rules to follow, and most people will never encounter them. But for those who do, they're not easily stopped. For more on this strange industry, check out How Do Jail Bonds Actually Work, or watch FBI's Most Violent Wanted of All Time for where the biggest bounties might be waiting.